Hi, my name is Rachel Levy, and I'm with Rethinking Psychiatry, and I'm here with Voyce Hendrix, who is a social worker who worked at the original Soteria house in California and throughout the 70s and early 80s. And he gave a great talk on November 1st about his experience working there. And we had a great turnout. We had lots of great questions. We didn't have time to get to all of the questions. So we're going over the questions we did not have time to get to. So thank you, Voyce. The first question we didn't have time to cover was, in John Ware Perry's book, Trials of a Visionary Mind, he says psychosis will run its course in 6 weeks or 42 days. Was this built into the Soteria model?
As I said, that's probably, actually, as I think about it, that's probably a little longer than the average resident at Soteria, but that wouldn't be out of the norm for that amount of time. In terms of overt symptoms, the average would be somewhere, the early part would be 2 weeks, the latter part would be probably 4 weeks, there's exceptions, of course. And like I said, it's realizing that we were dealing with people who were going through the first break. If this is someone, we did have residents there that were not part of the study that had 10 years of being on medication. And we eventually got several off medication. And in that case, in fact, probably the best outcome, the person took at least 8 months before he completely got symptom free. So there's a very difference between someone who's had the first break and had not that long experience with the symptoms and someone who's been treated for a long time in the system. So it's very different.
Great. The next question was, did you have any association with Judy Chamberlain and the mental patients liberation movement?
Yes, I did. I think a couple of times, and the problem when I thought this question came up somewhere earlier, and I realized sometimes I get confused. Virginia Soteria and Chamberlain get mixed up sometimes in my head, and I've had contact with both of them, but it actually, I think I think it's 2 times, but it may have been only once. But other individuals in the program, like Lauren, Dr. Mosier, and Alma Min, and a couple other people may have a lot more contact with her. But like I said, I know one time, and I think I can remember the second time, but it was not officially as part of the Soteria project.
Okay, great. Next one was kind of a 2-part question. What was the full criteria for admission and the average time of stay?
The average, it's interesting because it's an important question, because the first 2 residents at Soteria, the average stay was 5 months. From that point on, the average stay was three months. And the difference had nothing to do with their time at Soteria, but our skill in getting someone out, discharging. The first one, it took us 2 months to get her discharged out from the program. It was just that difficult. But it had nothing to do with her symptoms or her ability. She could have left 3 months after being admitted, 3 months, and it had been perfectly fine. But our skills with getting someone discharged was very poor at the time.
Next question was, what other health conditions did people experience while they were there, and how were they treated?
That's interesting, because I think I've worked in the field for about 50 years, and usually the other places and times that I work, usually you find people who get in the system, they get not only medications with psychotropic medications, but they tend to be overly medicated with traditional medications. But Soteria, that really, there was very little medications other than the very few psychotropic drugs they got. Yeah, but I know someone must have got medication, but I don't remember maybe many of our residents being treated with, normal other physical medications other than psychiatric medications.
Okay, great. The next question was, what written clinical studies or published studies were there to advocate and support people being able to achieve recovery without taking medications?
You mean other studies? Yeah, there was at the time of Soteria, there was the most famous or important study would have been the Rappaport study at the Agnes State Hospital. There was also Chamberlain. There was a study in DC at the time. I know I'm blocking it, but that was going on. But I'm not familiar with other studies that were happening at the time. The way to find out that is you can find John Bola's study about. He went back and looked through history of all the studies that compared medication versus non-medication use. That's the only study that I know of. But there's been other studies that I'm not familiar. There was also the Being Sane in Insane Places done by David Rosenhan that would have implications for medication, but it wasn't a medication study. Soteria itself wasn't a medication study in its sense of it, like a double-blind study, but it had implications in terms of medication versus non-medication, because by just tracking the outcome.
Great. The next question is, how did you help people make meaning of their profound experiences with hearing voices and extreme states?
That will take a couple of days talking to get to understand. I'll give you my theory, what's going on in terms of, if you think about the first break, the people who are coming to Soteria, almost all of them, when they were admitted, the days before being hospitalized or becoming stable, they were usually not sleeping, for instance. And I think there's a correlation between, especially for this group of people, not people who've been on medication for years, it's a very different thing that's going on. That I think there is a correlation between sleep, what I term dreaming while awake. The things that we call symptoms, I think it has a relationship between people who are not sleeping and who are up for days sometimes, and the process of dreaming actually happening while you're awake, and we see them as symptoms. When it comes to Soteria, the important issues, no one in Soteria knows why someone is hallucinating. So the issue of Soteria is not to impact on that in any kind of forward, trying to think of the word. We don't confront it as a way of, like a therapist would, in terms of the patient, client or therapist. The point of Soteria is creating an environment where that person who's experiencing those symptoms can actually do the adjustment what they need in their head, and also by interacting with normalcy in terms of individual behavior, not only staff, but the ex-resident and other people in the community. The person who's going through it actually makes the adjustment. The people around him giving a context for that person to make those judgments. So I think I told the story about the good mommy, bad mommy, the treating someone. I mean, that's an issue of doing to somebody versus being with. The issue of Soteria is being with. That being with becomes important because it allows the individual to get what they need from whoever they need it at the time when they need it. So it's creating the environment where the person who's going through it can make their necessary adjustments in life, and they do. You can see it. The first thing that happened, they start sleeping, and even the most profound thing, a person who be totally delusional, and they go to sleep for 8 hours, and they wake up almost inevitably, you'll see no symptoms for a while. Until then a half hour later, then the full-blown symptoms, all that. But there's something about the sleep, the adjustment, and whatever they need to go through that causes that change to allow them to reconstitute. What we think of it. Yeah.
Makes sense, definitely. Yep, we've got 2 more questions. The next one was, what were the perceptions on gender, class, and race in people at Soteria House? No, that's a complicated question.
Yes, okay. Yeah, it is, because it didn't think about it that much at the time. Because you realize this is 1971 in San Jose. I think, like, for instance, African American population in San Jose was 3%, I think. Also, you have to realize back during that time, most black people would get picked up with police. They went to jail, not the hospital. So the numbers, Soteria, we didn't select who came, so we didn't have any control of race or gender in that sense. And the other thing you have to realize that at the time, I forget the numbers, but more women had mental health issues, but more men would be hospitalized. The balance. So Soteria, the balance of Soteria would be more male versus female, the same way in the control group. But it had nothing to do with the others' decisions who to admit, who not to admit. So we didn't have that control. So I only recall one African American resident at Soteria. There were probably 4 Hispanic. And it's interesting because most people don't think Hispanic can be very different. We have 2 of the families, or 2 of the residents were Hispanics who had been in their families had been in California before California was a state, or was California. And the other 2 were recent immigrants, and they're very different. The families were quite different, and we had to respond differently through experience. We changed our behaviors with the family, and it would take a long time to explain all that. But those are the kind of issues. There were several times when staff complained and wanted to do something about the balance between male and female. But when we get into the issues of realizing we don't have that, was it would be difficult for the study to suddenly go out and try to find females, because our source was the county hospital, so we didn't have control. There were a couple of times we did go to private hospital, and we got 2 females that way, sort of. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but at least we did 2 females. But that was a very, very small impact on the balance.
Great. And last question was, were families paying out of pocket for Soteria House? So basically,
No, not really. We did, like I said, we did take in, because of some financial issues, we took in some private clients. And in that case, the families paid to their stay, but they would not, that wasn't part of the study. The people in the study had no, the families had no obligation for paying anything. In most cases, at first we were pretty bad at it, later on it got better at getting people on Social Security and to help pay for this part of their stay there. But there was no commitment or in terms of the family having to support their family members at Soteria.
and wasn't the National Institute of Mental Health paying for?
Yes, they were paying the bulk of the cost, but there was, you know, they, like I said, the problem with Soteria, like any other study, that we needed more staff, and sometimes we, by doing that. And the other thing that happened, sort of at the midway of Soteria, CETA, I'm not sure if you remember, I'm not be old enough to remember CETA. CETA was a federally funded program. It's like what we're talking about, the government actually paying for people to go to have jobs. There was a time in the 70s where there was a program called CETA, and we got at least one staff over the period of time that CETA was enacted. I think at one point we had two, but that we just got it. The government paid for people to work it. The government paid for a lot of people to work a lot of jobs at that during that point. I don't know what the CETA stands for, but it's a government program.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've ever heard of that program. Do you know how it's spelled?
CETA, SETA, and I'm not sure what that stands. I'm not sure what it stands for. I remember calling it CETA. Yeah.
It sounds like a
Yeah,
worthwhile
a
program.
lot of mental health program got staff through CETA. It was federal money. It was federal money through the state.
Great. Great. Well, that was all the questions we have. So thank you so much for both for the talk and for answering the additional questions. And yeah, people seemed really interested. So
That's 7 questions. Wow, that was.
I think so. I may have corrected one, but yes, thank you so much. And this will be posted online. And yeah, well, we really appreciate you giving such a great talk. And there's clearly a lot of interest in the subject.
Yeah, it was difficult to give a talk in that amount of time, but I'm hoping that you guys at least got some sense of what the original Soteria was like.
Yes, I think so. I think so. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Great. Thanks. Any closing remarks?
No, not really. Other than thanks for the opportunity to, to talk to individuals. It was really nice seeing old friends like
Yes.
Yana and those couple of
Yes.
and Jim Gottstein. Yeah, that was really fun. So
yes.
thank you
Great.
guys for allowing me to do that.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thanks. Take care. Have a good night.
Okay. Bye.
Great. Okay. Bye.